Hey guys, it's me, Javier. Today, I'm joined with Charlie from the Crimelines Podcast, and we're going to talk about the best con artist of all time. His name is Victor Lustig, and he sold the Eiffel Tower not just once, but twice. Well, put an asterisk on that. Here's my conversation with Charlie.
All right, welcome, Javier, to both of our YouTube channels. I guess we're going to post this on both.
Yeah, we're tag teaming. We're collaborating.
Yeah, trying to do a very podcaster thing over here on YouTube.
I know, which is actually how podcasters grow, right? When I first started Pretend, my podcast, I reached out to many podcasters who were always eager to lend a hand and help other people grow. So it's awesome that we're doing this again, too.
In honor of having Javier, who hosts Pretend Radio, which is a podcast about criminals and now a YouTube channel about cons and anyone who pretends to be someone else, right?
Yeah, basically, I mean, it's mostly about con artists, but it's really about deception, right? And so I even have FBI undercover agents like Joe Pistone, who played the real Donnie Brasco. On the show because he's pretending to be someone else. So it's really more about that concept of deception. Con artists happen to fill up a lot of my time. And I actually tried to interview them and get them on my show, which a lot of times I'm very successful in getting them to talk because con artists, as you will learn later on in this episode, are very egotistical and love and take a lot of pride in their work.
For this crossover, we're doing my favorite con artist, who is Victor Lustig. And one of the reasons I think it would be really perfect for this is that if he hadn't died decades ago, like he would have talked to you. Like he absolutely would have done an interview with you.
No doubt.
And so I thought this is really the right type of con artist for us to talk about.
I think my biggest challenge would be getting through the Alcatraz PR people.
I'm sure they limited. You could just take a tour boat over there.
That's right. Yeah.
This is a case of someone who pretended to be someone else for so long that we don't actually know his real identity.
That's right. I mean, there's very little that we actually know about, Victor. He's tells people different stories about his background. I guess, his father was supposedly the mayor of town and he grew up rich, but then there's also reports that he grew up very poor. So we don't even know exactly when he was born.
Yeah, and we don't know his name. Like he ended up using Victor Lustig in the US, calling himself Count Victor Lustig as like an exiled noble person from vaguely in Europe is all he would say. Yeah. He was almost surely German. He does have a brother who came forward it's either Emil or Emil. Being that he's German, it's probably pronounced Emil. And he used the last name Lustig. And I was like, well, so is that really your last name? But I'm guessing we don't even know if that guy's really his brother. Like, what do we know? He ended up being tried eventually when he was finally brought to trial under the name Robert Miller, which is a very English name. So it's very unlikely that's him. But people have gone through all school records and can't find him anywhere.
Yeah, apparently there's 47 aliases that he used to use and dozens of fake passports that he had. I mean, God knows who Victor Lustig really is. But I'll tell you one thing. He's one of my favorite con artists. And I would imagine that most people's number one con artist, too, because this guy just did it all.
He absolutely.
He was like cookie cut shape con artist.
I mean, look at him. You trust him, right? Like he just has that vaguely European look. He's wearing an expensive suit. He always made sure he looked the part because one of his rules of being a con artist was you had to be believable. Like people had to trust you. They had to trust that you didn't need their money and they'd be much more likely to give it to you. If they thought you needed it, they didn't want to give it to you. And when he got started, in Europe, he did the usual street hustling type thing, some pickpocketing. He would be arrested for some petty crimes and vagrancy, basically. But he eventually realized that you can't walk around as a vagrant in rich spaces and get away with it. So he decided what he had to do was blend in where the rich people were. And so he started going on transatlantic luxury cruises. And this is pre-World War I. He hustled enough money to buy one ticket. And then he basically figured out how to con people just through sleight of hand type games while on these luxury cruises.
Which blows my mind, because why would you want to con somebody when you're in this enclosed space in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean?
For weeks.
For weeks.
Yeah, and he always, one of his rules that he had was if you con a rich person, they're less likely to go to the police because they could afford to lose the money. Right. Mm-hmm. So they don't really care and they don't want to be embarrassed by having been conned. Or you con people who are breaking the law because then they can't go.
And this is the way that the con man justifies his actions. You know, I don't know if you ever watched the movie Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, but, you know, the Michael Caine character, he felt like he was Robin Hood. He was robbing from the rich. He was it was some twisted altruistic reasons why he did this. But at the end of the day, he's still conning people out of their money.
Exactly. Yeah. And while on one of these cruises, he actually met another con man who was doing the same thing, but he had been doing it longer. So, you know, kind of like, you know, people, birds of a feather kind of thing. They got together. And that's when Victor Lustig started learning some real rules of being a con man, which we'll get into the 10 Commandments he compiled later on because they're very interesting. But like one of the rules was always let your mark suggest the game. Always have them come to you because they'll be a lot less skeptical. And one of the things that was really hard was when you're on a cruise ship, was to leave before the mark caught on to what you were doing. I mean, that was much harder when you're on a cruise ship, but the cruise industry started collapsing with World War I because nobody wanted to get shot out of the water. So that was pretty much the end of it. And Victor Lustig ended up in America some point before the end of the war, but we don't we don't know his name, so we don't know when he got here.
Yep.
Can't find the records, even though,
Ellis Island.
Yeah, go on ellisisland.com. You're not going to find him. He claimed to be this political exile from the Balkans, you know, over there somewhere, is basically what he said. He figured nobody knew enough to question it, and they didn't.
Mm-hmm. There was no internet either, so you can.
There was no internet.
Fact check this.
So yeah, he just showed up in a nice suit with a fancy accent and really blended in first in New York City with the society types. But then he ended up traveling the country. Again, he would like swindle people and then get out of town. And we do know his first known arrest in the United States was actually here in Kansas City in April 1919. So yeah, he actually even met his wife here in this city. He committed one of his first early cons, which like we're all familiar with it with our email Nigerian prince scams. Yeah. That's literally what he did. He said, I'm going to get a lot of money soon. I had this great bet or whatever. And if this person put in some of their money, he could go collect all the money and then split it. And of course, he'd take the money and run. And he ended up not disappearing fast enough from Kansas City and got arrested. But when he paid his bail, then he jumped bail.
Right. You got to keep moving. He's really fascinating. I wanted to add something to what you said earlier, which is, a good con man has to make the mark think that it was their idea. Mm-hmm. And I see that over and over and over again on Pretend. There was this one inheritance scam, this woman who was trying to fool one of her friends that she was the heir to this fortune from Ireland. She didn't tell him what the plan was. She planted all the seeds in his head until he connected the dots. And he's like, hey, why don't we do X, Y, and Z? And she's like, wow, that is a brilliant idea, because it's better if the mark comes up with the idea.
They're not going to be skeptical because they're the brilliant one. And so we're going to get to like the best scam he did, I really think, which is the Rumanian Box. So let me go ahead.
Oh, really? You put that ahead of the Eiffel Tower?
I do. I really like this one because there's only so many times, and we'll get to selling the Eiffel Tower. There's only so many times you can do it. Twice, we've learned.
Right.
But
which is 2 times more than I thought you could do.
2 times more. I mean, he technically only sold it once, but he tried twice. So this is the box. And so, there's a polished up version. He didn't invent this, but he really made a lot of use out of it. And it's basically a money printing machine. You put a bill in and it basically Xerox copies it for you. It's got a bunch of like fancy dials and knobs on it to make it look real legit, but it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, it's a useless machine.
It's a box. And so what he would do is he'd say, okay, you feed your bill into it. You have to wait 6 to 12 hours, whatever amount of time. And then you turn the crank and out pops a perfect bill that is identical and you can pass it. It won't be flagged as a counterfeit. He even had them add like a little bit of a special chemical to it, add some paper. Like he had a whole process of what you had to do. And it was basically, obviously, he just had 2 bills. He fed one in and the other popped out.
Yeah, he had a real bill, right?
Yeah.
That he was saying was counterfeit.
Yeah. So he would go and he'd get 2 bills in sequential order with the serial number, and he'd change one really carefully to look like the other one. So they did look like identical copies, and they were 2 real bills. So he would do this. He would sit with the people for the 6 to 12 hours while the process happened, and then they would turn the crank. The bill would come out. He would go with them to the bank and say, can you verify this money is not counterfeit? And the bank teller would look at the new bill, which was real, and say, oh, yeah, this is totally a real bill, which it was.
Because it is.
It is. And that's the thing. Then he would collect the money. He would charge $10,000 in like 1920 money or more if he could talk them into it for the box. And it cost him $200 of money or, $20, whatever denomination he used.
The 2 bills that he had to put in there.
The 2 bills he had to put in there. And he would make $10,000. And by the time, because it took 6 to 12 hours to work, by the time they tried to do it the second time, he was gone. He was long gone. And
I heard sometimes he would stuff extra bills in the box just
to give himself a little
buy
bit,
himself some time.
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple $100 and he would get 10,000 more even. And no one could go to the police because they were trying to counterfeit money. They can't go to the police and say, this guy sold me a fake box so that I could steal.
So I could go break the law.
Yeah. Right? So literally
that's another thing about con artists, that they, the victim, we always try to think of the victim as, they got scammed and we're very sympathetic to them. But a lot of times victims are trying to get away with something too.
Yep.
Except the con artist is just better than that.
And exactly. And that is what one of, Victor's 2 people he'd steal from were people who could afford to lose the money or would be embarrassed at losing it, so they wouldn't go to the police, or people who can't go because they're breaking the law with him or attempting to.
So, Charlie, I meant to do this before this recording, but we should do it before we post it. Are these machines or boxes on eBay? Because I don't know. I want one for my shelf.
Yeah, we absolutely need to do an eBay search.
I don't see one. I see a couple, but anyways, I definitely am putting that on my Amazon wish list.
Yeah, that needs to go to like the pretend radio museum.
That's right. I can't believe I don't own this thing. All right.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that's my favorite con, because you could just do it over and over and over again. And they couldn't go to the police, which is not the same with the Eiffel Tower, where they could go to the police. But let's go ahead and talk about that one, because this is his most
That's what he's
famous.
known for.
If
he were the Rolling Stones, this is his satisfaction.
Absolutely. And if you Google his name, almost all of the articles are man who sold Eiffel Tower. Like that is what he is known for. And I will say it is a grand con to pull off.
That's right.
So he ended up in France after he had run out of a lot of towns. He did have warrants out for some petty crimes, because some people did go to the police. But he's in France and he basically reads some articles that are talking about what to do with the Eiffel Tower, because it wasn't meant to stay up there.
That's right. And that's what when you first hear this story, you're like, who sells the Eiffel Tower? That seems ludicrous because we see it on tourism ads. We see them in movies. Why would you want to sell something?
It's iconic.
But at the time, it was a temporary monument, right? That was put in there for the 89 World Fair. And at the time when all this is going on with Victor Lustig, it was actually rusting and kind of falling apart.
It was an eyesore.
Yeah.
It had use during, like World War I, and they were using it kind of as a radio tower and stuff, but it was expensive to keep the upkeep. It was falling into disrepair, so they were going to have to fix it. Even maintaining the grounds was something that the taxpayers were paying for. And so there was actual discussion about what to do. And this is where historical context in stories is so important, because I can't imagine that you couldn't pull this off today. So he partnered with another con artist who's known as Dapper Dan Collins, which is just a great con artist name.
What a name.
Yeah, I know. I believe it was his mother who was French. So he was fluent to the point of not really even having much of an accent, where Victor Lustig could speak some French, but obviously with an accent. So they forged some government letterhead and they wrote to 5 heads of salvage companies, inviting them to a meeting to discuss a government contract that was going out on a big project. But he had to keep it be quiet about it. So please come to this meeting and we'll tell you more about it. So they all went and they literally told them, we're tearing down the Eiffel Tower, but we need someone to pull away the scrap metal. Who wants it? But they had to get everyone to kind of stay quiet about it. They had to say, well, this is just such a controversial issue that the government doesn't want the public outcry for the people who want to keep it. So you got to just stay quiet, to keep all the road.
Keep it on the DL.
Yeah. Keep it moving so that they could get the tower taken down before anyone has a chance to stop them. And
these were serious metal people, right?
Absolutely.
These weren't like a bunch of dummies that were, metal's expensive. Yep. And here you got this big, tower
Huge.
Of metal. Yeah.
And it was kind of a reverse IKEA situation. They had to tear it down and haul it away. And they were taking bids for the job. So they would pay the government to be able to take it, and then they'd be able to sell it for way more. So they all were given like the weekend, or they were given a few days to come back with their bid, which goes back to his rule book where he says you have to be patient. Like you can't run a con really fast if you want to get away with it. And the other thing was he was making them name the price. They were coming to him with the amount of money they were willing to give him. Yeah. Let the mark pick the game kind of thing.
And I like how complicated the con is, because it's not a simple transaction. He adds layers to it, which, we all fantasize about the long con. Mm-hmm. This kind of falls into the long con category.
And the level of detail to be able to do this. And according to how the story goes, is that it actually, whatever the bids came in, didn't really matter, because Victor had watched all 5 of them in that meeting.
Yep.
And he picked the one who seemed the most eager, the one who asked the least amount of questions, the one who seemed not at all skeptical. That was who he was going to take on no matter what came in. So he knew who he was picking. And he gave them the money. And Dapper Dan and Victor took off. They went to Vienna. They cashed the check, obviously, first. And then they were waiting it out because they were sure it was going to hit the news.
Yeah. This is the scam of the century, right?
They were so worried that this sale of the Eiffel Tower to some hapless scrapper was going to hit the news. Arrest warrants were going to go out for them. And they waited for weeks, watching the papers, and saw absolutely nothing. Because, again, Victor chose well. This man was so embarrassed at getting scammed that he never reported it to the authorities. when he got away with it the first time, Victor decided to try it again. Have you seen that with con people? They'll just keep trying it till
Absolutely. They perfect it, actually. It's almost, there's a lot of similarities between a magician and a con artist. You got to get the con just right and perfect it. And what worked last time? How can I improve upon it? This is very classic. So if for us non-con artist people, it seems ludicrous that he would try to do this twice. But actually, they do it all the time.
I think maybe that's what makes them con artists, is that they tell a lie, they get away with it. And instead of being like a normal person who's like, oh, okay, I got away with it. My anxiety is appeased. Now I'm going to leave. Now I'm going to stop because
I'm ashamed.
And I felt anxious. I didn't feel good. Instead, they're like, okay, I got away with it. So let me take the next step.
It's a rush. Can I do it again? Can I do it better?
Different.
Can I perfect it? Yeah.
It's so different than that's why I always say that's why I like con artists, is because their brains work so differently than mine that it's fascinating to me.
Yeah. They're just salespeople with less of a conscience.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. He went back to Paris and tried to sell the Eiffel Tower again. He did the same thing, setting up the hotel room and getting ready. But even though you see a lot of the articles say he sold the Eiffel Tower twice, that's giving him a little too much credit because
he didn't quite make that sale the second time.
This time his mark was suspicious and went to verify it first and found out, no, it's not. And so he didn't sell it, and they did issue an arrest warrant for him. And that's when he fled the country again. And this time, after that came out, the first person came forward and said, okay, yeah, I got scammed by this guy on the same scam. And Victor, we don't really know exactly where he went after this, but he did end up back in Kansas City.
Yes.
And then he went to New York, and he started dealing with just more counterfeiting at this point, much less interesting things. He faked alcohol labels to say it was from Europe rather than bathtub gin. This was Prohibition. He did a huge counterfeiting operation. And again, his attention to detail was great. So his bills were better than any other counterfeit bills out there.
Yeah, actually, there's one online that is, I think, a $2 bill, and it looks really legit.
Yeah, they printed using ink the fibers that were even in the bills back then. And another thing where he was smart is he never spent any of the counterfeit money himself. He sold it for pennies on the dollar, and he spent the real money, which is what kept him kind of a step behind it. But he eventually got caught because it's a windy story on how he finally got caught. Yeah. Like, he goes to Mexico, then he goes to Texas, he scams a sheriff, and in scamming the sheriff, he ends up giving the sheriff some of the counterfeit money. And the sheriff spent it.
I love this story, though. What a twist here, because here you got a law enforcement officer buying, and was it the machine that he was trying to buy, the box?
He first bought the box because the sheriff was not such a great con man. He was embezzling money from the city, and he was very close to getting caught. And so he wanted the box so that he can make money to pay back the city coffers. And to buy the box, to pay back the coffers, he stole more money from the coffers. So now he's in debt to the city for a lot of money. And so, he ended up getting the box. It didn't work. He tracked Victor down, and Victor paid him off with counterfeit money. I mean,
but this is if I remember correctly, I think the sheriff confronted him about this box. Hey, you scammed me. And he goes, no, the box is broken. Let me show you how it works.
Yeah.
And then he sent him off again, and he scammed him a second time.
And he gave him more money, and the money this time was counterfeit, and the sheriff used one of it. It got flagged, and he got arrested.
Yeah.
He would not say where he got the money, but this money had been in circulation in New York enough that the Secret Service knew there was a really good counterfeiter out there. And so it all got flagged. They figured out who he had been talking to recently, and that's how they found Victor Lustig. How they caught him is a whole other story. He eventually called one of his girlfriends who ran a brothel and they had tapped her phone. And so she arranged for him to come over, and that is how they arrested him. And then
was that the last time they got him? Or?
Until he escaped.
Oh, that's right.
He did escape at one point. He was in the New York Federal House of Detention, which was in the city. The guards were taking everyone outside, and he held back, and he had been studying for months. So he got arrested in May 1935. In September is when he made his escape. He spent months studying all of the guards' habits.
And didn't he make a rope to get out of prison? He
did. And the way he got the sheets to make the rope is every time the laundry would come by and say, how many sheets does your block need? He needed 45. He'd say 46. And so he kept one, and then he tore it and he made a rope. Eventually, the rope was 46 feet long. Because, I mean, they kept the prisoners up high so they wouldn't escape. And he escaped out the window to, like, people walking down the street. But he waited until he knew the guards would all not be watching. Right. The one time a day that they're moving everyone to the roof, because they would have time outside in the yard. Being in the city, the yard was the rooftop. So he waited till everyone went up there. And he was actually on the run for 3 weeks.
Yep.
Until he was caught, and then they tried him under the name Robert Miller. He ended up being convicted because he blurted out guilty in the middle of his trial. He had pleaded not guilty, and in the middle of the trial, when his accomplice in the counterfeiting was testifying, he stood up and just yelled guilty. He said, "I'm guilty."
I didn't know this. That's
how he got convicted. And he said that he didn't think his accomplice would actually testify against him. And then once he did, he realized he had no hope of being found not guilty. But I mean, a lot of people think he was afraid of what else the accomplice was going to say on the stand.
Right.
Like what else?
Tack on more time.
Yeah. So he got sent 20 years and he went right to Alcatraz. Now, if you know the history of Alcatraz, it is more of a like prison of last resort. It's a lot of people don't go there immediately, but because he had already escaped, he got sent there. And one of the people who was there when he was there was Al Capone, which is someone he had scammed.
He scammed Al Capone. And now it wasn't like a huge scam, but who scams Al Capone? I mean, that seems so risky.
And it's such an interesting scam because he basically scammed Al Capone out of money, returned the money, sad-fished, saying he didn't have money to survive, and had Al Capone give him the money back. Not all, just some of it. But I'm like, wait, so you scammed him out of money, you gave it back, you said you were broke, and you got your mark to just give you money you had scammed from him back. Who even does that?
That's the safest con that I could think of.
The donation.
Yeah, it's like, hey, I tried to, invest your money. It didn't work. Poor me. And then Al Capone, I guess, felt bad and gave him some money. But hey, he conned one of the greatest gangsters of all time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and Victor got stuck out in Alcatraz, and he tried what may have been an escape attempt. He, being fluent in German, offered to go to Germany to act as a spy during World War II. Mm-hmm. The assumption is that he was going to just, disappear once they got him to Germany. Of course, they didn't take his ridiculous offer, but that's considered his last attempted con. He did start getting sick in the early to mid 1940s, but they thought he was faking it to get sent to a less secure prison. But it turned out he was actually very sick. He had a frontal brain abscess, and it was causing like half his body completely paralyzed. So he was sent from Alcatraz to a prison in Springfield, Missouri, where the medical center is, and he died in prison there.
But so, I mean, what a career.
On the death certificate under occupation, it says apprentice, salesman, and counterfeiter. That's on his death certificate is con man, basically.
Nice.
And I thought that's a fitting end to Victor Lustig. He got it right there on his death certificate. Thank you so much. We'll have to definitely do this again.
Yes. Thank you so much, Charlie.